On a rainy night, a street girl desperately knocks on a millionaire's mansion door and with tears in her eyes reveals, "Sir, your son is starving." The millionaire, who always believed he could never have children, feels his world collapse. As he gets closer, he is shocked to see something unbelievable in the baby's features. What happens in the next few minutes is so surprising that it will change everything forever. The rain lashed against the windows of the Ashton Manor when desperate knocking echoed at the main door. Edward Ashton, a 52-year-old man known as much for his fortune as for his loneliness, looked up from the laptop where he was working. Late. The clock on the wall showed 2:30 in the morning. The knocking continued, more urgent. Edward hesitated, his analytical mind calculating the risks of opening the door at this hour. After 20 years building his business empire, he had learned to distrust everyone and everything. Loneliness was his only constant companion, especially since the doctors confirmed his infertility. "Mr. Ashton, please, open up!" A desperate, childlike voice pierced the solid wood of the door. "It's urgent!" Something in that cry moved something within him. He stood up, crossed the silent hallway of the manor, and against his better judgment unlocked the door. The scene before him made his blood run cold. A girl of about 12, soaked to the bone, held a small bundle precariously protected by a grubby blanket. Her large, frightened eyes met his, and her next words made the floor disappear beneath his feet. "Mister, your son is starving." Edward felt the air leave his lungs. "Impossible," he murmured, more to himself than to the girl. But before he could process that absurd claim, the bundle in her arms moved, and a weak cry emerged from the blanket. "He's sick," the girl continued, her voice trembling. "Hasn't eaten properly in 2 days. I tried everything, but—" Edward looked closer at the baby. He must have been only a few months old. He was pale, his sunken cheeks indicating malnutrition. But it was a detail on the blanket that made his heart skip a beat. Embroidered in the corner, in faded blue thread, were his old initials, EA, the same embroidery pattern his mother used on his baby clothes more than 50 years ago. "Come in," he ordered, his voice hoarse. The girl hesitated for a moment, as if expecting a trap, but the baby's cries spurred her forward. "Sophia!" Edward called his housekeeper, who slept in her room downstairs. "Sophia, come immediately!" While they waited, Edward observed the girl more closely. Her bare feet left wet marks on the marble floor, and she shivered violently, but her arms held the baby firmly against her chest. There was something fierce in her posture, like a wild animal protecting its young. Sophia appeared, hastily tying her robe. Her eyes widened at the sight. "Mr. Ashton, what?" "Prepare the guest room," he interrupted, "and bring dry towels and clean clothes. The baby needs urgent care. But, sir, at this hour, shouldn't we call the police?" "Do as I say." His voice came out harsher than he intended. Sophia recoiled, casting a suspicious glance at the girl before heading up the stairs. "What's your name?" Edward asked, trying to soften his tone. "Maria," the girl replied, still clutching the baby. "And he's Miguel." "How did you find me, Maria? How do you know this baby, that he could be my son?" Maria swallowed hard. "The woman who gave him to me, she was very sick, made me promise I'd only bring him to you, said you'd know it was true because of the blanket, and—" She hesitated. "He has the same eyes as you." Edward moved closer, observing the baby more intently. The little one had stopped crying and was staring at him with unusually deep blue eyes. The same eyes he saw every morning in the mirror, his father's eyes. A whirlwind of memories flooded his mind. Helena, the young woman he'd met just over a year ago, during one of the rare times he'd gone out to dinner. The night they spent together. Her sudden disappearance, without explanation. At the time, he attributed it all to just another disappointment in his lonely life. But now, "Sophia," he called again. "Call Dr. Martinez. Tell him it's an emergency." As he listened to the housekeeper's hurried footsteps upstairs, Edward realized his organized, predictable life had just crumbled. And the most frightening was that a part of him, a part he had kept locked away for decades, felt strangely relieved by it. Dr. Martinez arrived at the manor in less than 20 minutes, his expression grave as he examined the baby in the guest room. Sophia had improvised a bed with pillows and clean blankets, and Maria, now wearing a pajama set several sizes too large, refused to move away from the crib. Moderate malnutrition and the beginning of pneumonia, the doctor diagnosed, packing away his instruments. "He needs antibiotics and a special diet. I'll prescribe everything, but it would be safer to admit him to the hospital." "No!" Maria cried out, taking a step forward. "I promised I wouldn't let them take him." Edward, who had been observing from the corner of the room, raised a hand in a calming gesture. "Nobody's taking Miguel anywhere. Can we treat him here, doctor?" The doctor hesitated, looking from Edward to the baby. "With intensive care and a private nurse, yes. But Edward, are you sure you want to get involved in this? The legal implications—" "Do whatever is necessary," Edward cut him off, his voice leaving no room for argument. "And Martinez, absolute discretion." After the doctor left, promising to send a reliable nurse later that morning, Edward turned to Maria. The girl was exhausted but remained standing by the crib, like a little sentinel. "You need to rest," he said more gently than he thought himself capable. "Sophia has prepared a room for you." Maria shook her head. "I can't leave him alone. I promised." "I promised." The word echoed in Edward's mind. How many promises had he himself broken over the years, always in the name of business, of success, of the empire he had built? And now, a street kid was giving him a lesson in loyalty. "Who did you promise, Maria?" he asked, pulling up a chair. "Who is the woman who gave you Miguel?" Maria bit her lip, her dark eyes studying Edward with unsettling intensity. "She said you'd ask questions. She also said I could only tell you after Miguel was better." Edward felt frustration rise but controlled it. Years of tough negotiations had taught him patience. "All right, but you need to tell me how you found my house." "She gave me a piece of paper with the address," Maria answered, her fingers nervously fiddling with the hem of the oversized pajamas. "I've been watching the house for 3 days, waiting for the courage to knock. But today," her voice faltered, "today Miguel started getting really hot, and I got scared." A lump formed in his throat. The thought of this child spending 3 days on the street protecting a sick baby, waiting for the right moment. Why hadn't Helena come directly to him? What was going on? Sophia entered the room carrying a tray with warm milk and cookies. "The nurse has arrived, Mr. Ashton. She's waiting downstairs. I'll go meet her. Sophia, stay with the children." He stood up, but before leaving, he turned back to Maria. "We'll talk more tomorrow. I promise no one will separate you from Miguel, but you need to trust me. Can you do that?" Maria stared at him for a long moment before nodding, such an adult gesture that it made Edward's heart ache. As he walked down the stairs, his mind was racing. In a few hours, his life had been completely turned upside down. The infertility diagnosis he'd carried for decades seemed to mock him now. Was it possible the doctors had been wrong? Or was this all an elaborate scam? The nurse, a middle-aged woman with a professional demeanor, listened to his instructions in silence. When he finished explaining the situation, or the little he knew of it, she asked only one question. "Are you sure you want to keep this quiet, sir? A sick child needs hospital paperwork." "I have my reasons," Edward replied curtly. Now we need to focus on the baby's recovery. I'll deal with the rest later." Returning upstairs, Edward paused at the doorway of the room. Maria had finally fallen asleep, curled up in the armchair beside the crib, while Sophia tucked a blanket around her shoulders. In the crib, Miguel also slept, his face still pale but more peaceful. The scene stirred something deep within Edward, something he'd buried along with his dreams of fatherhood long ago. But now, watching these two children fate had thrown onto his doorstep on a stormy night, he felt that something resurfaced, painful and insistent, like an old wound. Sophia passed him, pausing for a moment. "You're getting into trouble, sir," she whispered. "I have a bad feeling about this." Edward kept looking at the children. "Sometimes, Sophia," he murmured, "the worst trouble is exactly what we need." The housekeeper sighed and withdrew, leaving Edward alone with his thoughts and a growing certainty that the next few days would change his life forever. The first light of dawn found Edward in his study, his eyes burning after a sleepless night. On the desk before him, a cold cup of coffee and an old box of photographs he hadn't opened in years. Among dozens of photos yellowed with age, his fingers trembled as he held one in particular, himself at 2 years old on his mother's lap. The same deep blue eyes he now saw in Miguel. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he said, quickly putting the photograph away. It was Anthony, his driver for 15 years, bringing the medicine Dr. Martinez had prescribed. "Got everything from the 24-hour pharmacy, sir, and also," he hesitated for a moment, "I brought some baby clothes and diapers. My daughter just had a baby recently, so she still had some things left over." Edward nodded, grateful for the employee's initiative. "Thank you, Anthony, and please be discreet about this situation." "Of course, sir, but—" Anthony seemed to struggle with his words. "If you don't mind my saying, sir, I've seen a lot over the years. I've never seen you like this, so different." Before Edward could respond, a sharp cry cut through the air, coming from upstairs. Both men hurried to the guest room, where they found Maria thrashing in a troubled sleep, while Sophia tried to wake her. "Don't let her take him! Please, don't let her!" the girl cried, tears streaming down her still sleeping face. Edward instinctively approached, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Maria, wake up. You're safe here." The girl's eyes snapped open, disoriented and filled with terror. Recognizing Edward, she shrank back against the headboard. "Sorry," she murmured. "I didn't mean to bother you." "You didn't bother me," Edward answered softly. "Do you want to tell me about the nightmare?" Maria shook her head, her eyes already searching for the crib where Miguel slept. The night nurse gave a reassuring gesture. "He's fine. Drank his whole bottle an hour ago." "Mr. Ashton," Sophia interrupted, her voice tense, "you need to see this." The housekeeper held a small, crumpled piece of paper that had fallen from the pocket of Maria's wet dress, now hanging in the bathroom. It was an old newspaper clipping from almost 13 years ago, featuring a photo of a younger Edward in an article about his company. "Where did you get this?" Edward asked Maria, trying to keep his voice calm. The girl hugged her knees to her chest. "She gave it to me with the address. She said it was so I'd be sure I found the right person. And this woman, she's very sick, you said." Maria nodded slowly, her eyes filling with tears. "She was coughing up a lot of blood. At the hospital, they said she didn't have much time left. That's why—" her voice failed. "That's why she made me promise to bring Miguel here, said only you could take care of him." Edward felt the weight of those words like a punch to the gut. Helena was dying. Why hadn't she sought him out sooner? What else was hidden in this story? "Maria," he leaned forward, trying to meet the girl's eyes. "I need you to tell me which hospital Helena is in. I can help her. I have resources." "I can't," Maria cut him off, her voice small but firm. "I promised I'd only tell after Miguel was better. She said you'd want to go after her, but it was dangerous, that bad people were looking for her." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Sophia exchanged a significant look with Anthony, who remained at the door. The nurse pretended to be busy checking the baby's medication. Edward stood up, his mind working furiously. Bad people looking for Helena. What kind of danger could make a mother give her newborn son to a street kid? "All right," he said finally. "We'll do it your way, Maria. First, we'll take care of Miguel. But I need you to understand something. You're under my protection now too. No one will hurt you or Miguel here." Maria studied him for a long moment, as if searching for something in his face. Then, for the first time since she arrived, she offered a small smile. "Miss Helena said you were good, even if you pretended not to be." The words struck Edward like lightning. Helena knew him better than he realized. And now, in some mysterious way, she had found a way to meddle with everything he believed about himself. "Sophia," he called, his voice regaining its usual firmness. "Prepare a hearty breakfast for Maria. And Anthony—" He hesitated for a moment. "I need you to make some discreet inquiries. Start with the local hospitals." As the staff left, Edward looked once more at the newspaper clipping in his hands. His own image smiled back, confident and distant. How different that man seemed now. How different everything seemed after a single stormy night. 3 days passed, in a blur of sleepless nights and constant worries. Little Miguel was responding well to treatment, his cheeks starting to gain some color, but Edward could barely work. Every cry from the baby sent him running to the room. Every whisper from Maria put him on alert. That morning, while trying to focus on an important spreadsheet, Edward watched through the study window the scene unfolding in the garden. Maria, still wearing borrowed clothes Sophia had hastily altered, was talking with Mr. Peterson, the elderly gardener who had tended the flowers for over 2 decades. "Roses need love, little one." The gardener's rough voice drifted faintly to the study. "Just like people, if you don't give them care, they wither." Edward saw Maria gently touch a red rose, as if afraid of breaking it. There was something painfully familiar in that hesitant gesture. How many times had he felt that way himself, afraid to touch, to get close, to break something precious? A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Anthony, carrying a manila envelope. "Sir," the driver seemed nervous. "I found something about this Helena." Edward quickly closed the study door. "What did you find?" "Helena Martins, 35, admitted to St. Clair's Hospital 2 weeks ago, hospice care wing." Anthony hesitated before continuing. "Advanced stage cancer. The doctors say it's a matter of days." The floor seemed to vanish beneath Edward's feet. "Are you sure?" "Positive. And there's more." Anthony opened the envelope, revealing some papers. "I managed to get a copy of her patient record. She was admitted alone, without any documents for the baby. But I found something strange. Someone's been visiting her regularly. A man. He says he's her brother, but the staff said the visits always end in arguments." Edward sat down heavily in his chair. Helena was dying, just a few miles away. Helena, who had disappeared without explanation. Helena, who had apparently hidden a pregnancy from him. Helena, who was being threatened by someone. "There's one more thing, sir." Anthony looked even more uncomfortable. "The nurse who gave me this information, she said Helena always cries after this man leaves. And once she overheard him say something about selling what's rightfully his." A noise at the door made both men turn sharply. Maria stood there, her wide eyes fixed on Edward. "You found her?" the girl whispered, her voice trembling. I promised you'd wait." "Maria, wait." Edward stood up, but the girl had already bolted down the hallway. He found her in the room, hastily stuffing her few clothes into a makeshift bag. Miguel slept peacefully in his improvised crib. "I'm taking him away," Maria declared, her voice small but determined. "Miss Helena trusted me. She said it was dangerous, that he'd find her, that he'd try to take Miguel." "Maria," Edward approached slowly, like approaching a frightened animal. No one is going to take Miguel, I promise, but I need you to tell me everything now. Who is this man threatening Helena? The girl stopped her frantic movements, fat tears streaming down her face. Her brother, he's really bad. When he found out she was pregnant, he went crazy, said he'd sell the baby as soon as it was born, knew the father was rich. Miss Helena ran away, stayed hidden, but then she got sick. Edward felt a wave of nausea. Helena's brother planned to sell his own nephew. Was that why she had disappeared? Why didn't she come to me sooner, he asked, more to himself than to Maria. She was afraid, Maria answered quietly. Said you wouldn't believe her, that you'd think it was a scam, that she just wanted money. But when she got really sick, her voice faltered, she found me at the shelter, said I was the only one who could help, because nobody would suspect a street kid. The silence that followed was broken by Miguel's soft cry. Maria rushed to the crib, picking him up with a tenderness that broke Edward's heart. I won't let anyone hurt you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But I need you to trust me, Maria. I need to see Helena. I need to hear this whole story from her. Maria cradled Miguel, her eyes fixed on the baby. He'll be there today, she whispered. The bad man. He always goes on Wednesdays. Edward checked his watch. Wednesday, 10 a.m. His heart hammered so hard it felt like it would leap out of his chest. Stay with Miguel, he said, already heading for the door. Sophia and the nurse will be here. I'm going to handle this right now. Mr. Ashton, Maria called out as he reached the hallway. He turned. Miss Helena. She always said you were the only good person she'd ever met. Edward swallowed hard, unable to respond. As he hurried down the stairs, a certainty grew in his chest. His life would never be the same after this day. St. Clair's hospital smelled of disinfectant and sadness. Edward, still wearing the suit he'd planned to wear for an important meeting, felt out of place in the dimly lit corridors of the public wing. Anthony followed a few steps behind, obeying his instructions to stay alert for any suspicious movement. At the reception desk, a middle-aged nurse looked up with tired eyes. Helena Martins, room 407, but visiting hours don't start until 2 p.m. I'm a close relative, Edward lied, his voice controlled. Years of tough negotiations had taught him to maintain calm, even when his heart threatened to explode. Oh, you must be her brother, the nurse commented distractedly. She's already expecting you. Edward felt his blood run cold. Helena's brother, the man threatening to sell Miguel, was already here. For a moment he considered calling the police, but he remembered Maria's words about Helena's fear. No, he needed to handle this personally. Room 407 was at the end of a quiet corridor. The door was slightly ajar, and raised voices escaped through the crack. You can't do this to me, Ricardo. The woman's voice was weak, but filled with desperation. He's just a baby. A baby worth a fortune, the man's voice replied, harsh. Think I don't know who the father is? Edward Ashton, the great businessman. He'll pay a small fortune to keep this story quiet. A wave of fury washed over Edward. He shoved the door open forcefully, making it bang against the wall. The room was small and austere. On the single bed, an extremely thin and pale woman tried to sit up. Her eyes, which Edward remembered as vibrant brown, were now dulled by pain and medication. Beside her, a man of about 40 turned sharply. "Who are you?" Ricardo snarled, taking a step forward. "The father of the baby you're planning to sell," Edward replied, his voice cutting like ice. The silence that followed was deafening. Helena brought her hands to her face, starting to cry. Ricardo paled, but quickly regained his aggressive posture. "So, you finally showed up," he gave a crooked smile. "I was just thinking about how to get in touch. We have a lot to discuss about that little bastard." The word hit Edward like a slap. In 3 strides, he was in front of Ricardo, grabbing him by the collar of his shirt. "If you dare speak about my son like that again—" "Edward, no!" Helena cried out, her voice breaking in a violent cough. The cry brought him back to reality. He released Ricardo, who stumbled back and rushed to Helena's bedside. She was coughing uncontrollably, spots of blood appearing on the tissue she held. "Easy," he whispered, holding her free hand. "I'm here now." "Miguel," she managed to say between coughs. "Is he?" "He's safe. Maria brought him to me. He's getting better every day." Helena visibly relaxed against the pillows, silent tears streaming down her hollowed face. "Forgive me," she whispered. "I wanted to tell you, but when I found out I was pregnant, Ricardo—" She cast a frightened glance at her brother, who watched the scene with a calculating expression. "It doesn't matter now," Edward squeezed her hand gently. "I'll take care of everything. Miguel, this whole situation. It's too late for me." Helena smiled sadly. "The doctor said I don't have much time. I just wanted to be sure Miguel would be safe. Maria, she's a good girl. She looked after him like he was her own." "What about me?" Ricardo interrupted, his voice heavy with sarcasm. "Are you just going to leave me out of this whole story? I'm sure the press would love to know how the great Edward Ashton hid a bastard son." Edward turned slowly, facing Ricardo. In his years building his empire, he had learned to recognize people who only understood one language: power. "Anthony," he called, without taking his eyes off Ricardo. His driver immediately stepped into the room. "Show Mr. Ricardo the consequences of his threats." Anthony took an envelope from his jacket pocket and handed it to Ricardo, who opened it with trembling hands. His features changed from arrogance to shock as he saw the contents. How did you get this?" he stammered. "I have resources," Edward replied coldly. "And now I have enough evidence of your extortion attempts and human trafficking. Do you want to risk spending the next few years in prison?" Ricardo crumpled the envelope, his face contorted with rage, but Edward saw it in his eyes. He had won. "Get out of your sister's life," he ordered, "and never come near my son again." When Ricardo hurriedly left the room, Helena began to cry. Again. Edward sat on the edge of the bed, holding her frail hands in his. "Tell me everything," he asked softly, "from the beginning." Helena took a deep breath, her thin fingers lightly squeezing Edward's hand. In the quiet hospital room, even the hum of the ceiling fan seemed to respect the gravity of the moment. "I met you that night at Bella Vista," she began, her voice weak but determined. "I was a waitress there, remember? You were alone, sad. It was your mother's birthday, you told me." Edward nodded, the memory of that night returning like an old movie. He usually avoided going out on special dates, but that day the loneliness had been too heavy. "You were so kind," Helena continued, a small smile playing on her chapped lips. "Different from the other wealthy customers who came there. We talked for hours after my shift ended. About books, about dreams. You told me about your mother, how much you missed her." A tear traced a path down Helena's cheek. "When you asked me to dinner the next day, I knew I should say no. Ricardo was already pressuring me for money, threatening to tell the manager. About petty thefts I never committed, but you made me believe there was kindness in the world." Edward felt his heart clench. Those weeks with Helena had been a rare moment of light in his solitary life, until she disappeared without explanation, like so many others had before. "Why did you disappear?" he asked softly. Helena closed her eyes, an expression of pain crossing her face. "Ricardo found out about us. He has contacts on the police. He force people who owe him favors, started showing me photos of you leaving meetings, information about your company, said he was going to blackmail you, destroy your reputation with lies." She paused, overcome by a coughing fit. Edward poured her some water with trembling hands. Then I found out I was pregnant, Helena continued after a moment. It was like the world stopped. Ricardo was ecstatic, said it was our chance to get rich. He planned everything. He'd wait for the baby to be born and then approach you, demand a fortune in exchange for silence. You could have told me, Edward murmured. I would have protected you. Helena shook her head weakly. You had just told me about the infertility diagnosis, about how much it affected you. I thought you wouldn't believe me, that you'd think it was a scam, like all the other people who tried to get close to you for money. Edward closed, his eyes feeling the weight of the truth. She was right. Back then, his distrust was an armor he wore against the world. I fled to a small town, Helena went on. Worked odd jobs, always moving towns when Ricardo got close. I managed to hide the pregnancy, gave birth in a public hospital, but then, her voice faltered, then I started feeling the pain. When they discovered the cancer, it was already too late. She squeezed Edward's hand with surprising strength. I met Maria at the shelter where I stayed a few nights. She had just lost her mother, was all alone in the world. But there was something special about her, a strength, a kindness that reminded me of you. You entrusted your son to a street kid, Edward stated, unable to hide a tone of disapproval. I entrusted my son to someone with nothing to lose and everything to protect, Helena corrected, her eyes shining with feverish intensity. Maria promised she would only bring Miguel to you when he was truly in need of help. She understood that if Ricardo found out sooner, he'd sell the baby to the first bidder. Edward felt a lump in his throat. Helena's desperate wisdom, Maria's courage, Miguel's innocence. It all intertwined in a web of love and sacrifice he could barely comprehend. The blanket, he murmured. Helena smiled faintly. I found it at a flea market. When I saw your initials, EA, it felt like a sign. I kept it for months, waiting for the right moment. A heavy silence fell over the room. In the hallway, distant footsteps and voices were a reminder that the world kept turning outside, oblivious to the drama unfolding within. I'll transfer you to a private hospital, Edward said finally. The best doctors... No, Helena interrupted him gently. My time is running out, Edward. I just need to know, will you take care of him? Our son? I will, Edward answered without hesitation. And Maria too. They'll never know need or fear again. Helena visibly relaxed against the pillows, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. There's something in my nightstand. Get it for me. Edward opened the drawer and found a crumpled envelope. Inside was a photo, Helena holding a newborn Miguel, her eyes shining with love despite the deep, dark circles. The only picture I took with him, she whispered. I wanted you to have it, so he'll know someday that his mother loved him more than anything. Edward held the photo with trembling hands, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. In the corridor, the first rays of sunset painted golden shadows on the hospital walls. When Edward returned to the manor late that afternoon, he found the house in an uproar. Sophia met him at the door, her usually composed face etched with worry. Thank God you're here, sir, she whispered, pulling him inside. The girl's been impossible since you left. Locked herself in the room with the baby and won't let anyone in, not even the nurse. Edward took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding. In the hallway, the nurse was pacing, clearly distressed. Mr. Ashton, she approached quickly. The baby needs his medicine, but the girl won't open the door. She's afraid someone will take him away. Edward leaned his forehead against the door. Maria, he called softly. It's me. Please open the door. Silence. Then light footsteps approached. Did you talk to her? Maria's voice was thick with tears. To Miss Helena? I did. Edward replied, "and I promised her I'd take care of you both. But for that, I need you to trust me. Open the door, Maria." A few seconds passed before the click of the lock was heard. Edward entered alone, motioning for the other women to wait outside. Maria was sitting in the armchair by the crib, her eyes red from crying. Miguel slept peacefully, oblivious to the turmoil. "I'm sorry," she murmured, not looking at Edward. "I was afraid the bad man would come after us." Edward knelt in front of her, taking her small hands in his. "Ricardo won't bother you anymore, ever again." Maria finally looked up. "Miss Helena, she's really bad, isn't she?" Edward nodded slowly. "She is, but she's at peace now, knowing Miguel is safe." He hesitated for a moment before continuing. "She told me about you, about how you met at the shelter." Tears started streaming down Maria's face again. "She was the only person who was nice to me after my mom died. When she asked for my help, I promised I'd protect Miguel with my life." "And you kept your promise," Edward said softly, "better than any adult could have." Maria sobbed, and for the first time since arriving at the manor, allowed herself to be held. Edward held her as she cried, feeling her small body tremble. "I don't want to leave," she whispered between sobs. "Please don't send me back to the shelter." Edward gently held her at arm's length, looking into her eyes. "Maria, listen carefully. You and Miguel are my family now. This is your home, and it will be for as long as you want." The girl stared at him, searching his face for any sign of a lie. "But you barely know me." "I know enough," Edward smiled faintly. "I know your heart, your courage, your loyalty. Helena was right about you." Just then, Miguel started to whimper in his crib. Maria immediately moved to pick him up, but Edward gently stopped her. "Let me try this time." Maria hesitated for a moment before nodding. Edward approached the crib carefully, his heart hammering as he picked up his son for the first time. Miguel opened his eyes, those same deep blue eyes, and instantly stopped crying. "Hey, son," Edward whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. "Dad's here now." Maria watched the scene with a small smile. "Miss Helena said you two would get along. She said you just needed a chance to love someone." Edward felt tears burn his eyes. Helena knew him better than he knew himself. All his life, he'd hidden behind walls of distrust and loneliness, convinced he was destined to be alone. "Can we call the nurse now?" he asked Maria gently. "Miguel needs his medicine." The girl nodded, more relaxed. As the nurse entered the room and prepared the medication, Edward continued holding his son, marveling at every tiny movement, every expression. Sophia appeared at the door with a tray of hot chocolate and cookies. "I thought the children might be hungry," she said, giving Maria a meaningful look. "Thank you, Mrs. Sophia," Maria replied shyly. "I'm sorry I yelled at you earlier." The housekeeper smiled, her eyes softening. "It's all right, dear. We all do different things when we're scared." Edward watched the interaction with a lighter heart. His house, once so cold and silent, was beginning to feel like a real home. But a shadow still lingered in his thoughts, Helena fading away in that hospital room with so little time left. "Maria," he called softly, "do you want to visit Helena with me tomorrow? I think she'd really like to see you." The girl's eyes filled with tears again, but this time there was a smile on her lips. "Yes, Mr. Ashton, I really want to." The next morning dawned grey and cold. Edward watched Maria dressing Miguel with almost obsessive care, adjusting the little blue sweater Sophia had bought in a hurry the night before. "He needs to look nice for Miss Helena," Maria murmured, combing the baby's sparse hair. "She has to see we're taking good care of him." Edward felt a tightness in his chest. During the night, the hospital had called. Helena had taken a significant turn for the worse. The doctor suggested any important visits happen as soon as possible. "Are you ready?" he asked softly when Maria finished dressing the baby. The girl nodded, but her eyes betrayed her nervousness. She wore a simple dress Sophia had adjusted, and her hair was tied back in a neat braid. She looked younger this way, more vulnerable. "What if she doesn't recognize me?" Maria whispered as they walked down the stairs. "The nurse at the hospital said she's on a lot of strong medication. She'll recognize you," Edward assured her, even as his own heart felt heavy. "Helena would never forget you." In the car, Maria held Miguel tightly, softly singing a lullaby Edward didn't recognize. Anthony drove in silence, occasionally casting worried glances in the rearview mirror. The hospital seemed even gloomier than the day before. At the reception, the same nurse greeted them with a compassionate look. "She's lucid now," she informed them quietly. "But we don't know for how long. The doctors increased the morphine." Edward felt Maria squeeze his hand. They entered room 407 slowly, as if afraid of breaking something precious. Helena was even paler than the day before, but her eyes lit up when she saw her visitors. "Maria," she whispered, trying to sit up. "You came." Maria ran to the bed, tears already streaming down her face. "I brought Miguel, Miss Helena. Look how handsome he is." Carefully, she brought the baby closer so Helena could see him. The woman raised a trembling hand, lightly touching her son's face. "My boy," she murmured, "how he's grown. He looks so strong." "We're taking good care of him," Maria assured her, her voice choked with emotion. "Mr. Ashton is really good, just like you said he was. And Mrs. Sophia bought new clothes, and there's a nurse who—" "Easy, little one," Helena smiled faintly. "I know you kept your promise. You were always stronger than all of us." Edward watched the scene leaning against the wall, feeling almost like an intruder in this moment of farewell. Helena looked up at him. "Come closer," she asked. "I want to see the three of you together." He approached the bed, stopping beside Maria. Helena observed them for a long moment, as if wanting to memorize every detail. "I knew it would work out," she said softly. "The three of you. You look like a real family." Maria sobbed. "You're our family too. You'll get better soon and—" "Maria," Helena interrupted her gently, "remember what we talked about how sometimes we have to let go of the people we love." The girl nodded, crying harder. Helena continued, her voice growing weaker. "You're going to be Miguel's big sister now. You'll teach him everything I won't be able to. You'll tell him about me, about how much I loved you both." "I promise," Maria whispered. "I promise I'll take care of him forever." Helena smiled, then turned her gaze to Edward. "Forgive me," she asked, "for not trusting you sooner." "There's nothing to forgive," he replied, his voice hoarse. "You gave us the greatest gift possible." Just then, Miguel began to whimper. Helena tried to shift in the bed, her eyes anxious. Can I hold him one last time?" Edward helped Maria carefully place the baby in Helena's arms. Miguel calmed instantly, as if recognizing his mother's warmth. "My son," Helena murmured, tears streaming down her face. "Mommy loves you so much, so much." Her voice faded, her eyelids growing heavy. The nurse, who had entered silently, made a discreet gesture. "She needs to rest now," she said softly. Maria leaned down, kissing Helena's cheek. "I love you, Miss Helena," she whispered. Edward took Miguel back, his heart breaking as he saw how Helena struggled to keep her eyes open. "Take care of each other," she asked, her voice almost inaudible. "You three are everything I ever wanted." As they left the room, Maria clutching Edward's hand, the girl's silent sobs echoed in the empty corridor. In the car, she curled up on the back seat, hugging Miguel as if he were her only anchor in the world. Edward glanced in the rear view mirror, feeling his own vision blur. In just a few weeks, his life had changed completely, and now, watching his two children in the back seat, he understood he would never be the same again. The news came the following dawn via a phone call from the hospital. Edward answered on the first ring, already expecting the worst. Helena had passed away in her sleep, peacefully, still holding the photograph of Miguel he had returned to her. He sat in his study for hours, watching the sky turn from black to grey, wondering how he would break the news to Maria. The girl had fallen asleep holding Miguel, as she did every night, whispering stories to the baby about the mother who loved them so much. Sophia found him still there at dawn. "You need to rest, sir," she said softly, placing a cup of coffee on his desk. "How am I going to tell her, Sophia?" Edward asked, his voice hoarse. "Maria's already lost so much in her life." The housekeeper sat in the chair opposite his desk, something she had never done in all her years of service. "You'll find the right words, sir. That girl is stronger than we realize." A baby's cry interrupted the conversation. Soon after, hurried footsteps in the hallway. "Mr. Ashton?" Maria's voice was anxious. "Miguel's acting strange today. He doesn't want to eat properly." She stopped at the study door, still in her pajamas. Her smile vanished when she saw the look on Edward's face. "No," she whispered, clutching Miguel to her chest. "No, please." Edward stood up, approaching slowly. "Maria," she promised. "She'd hold on a little longer," the girl cried, tears beginning to stream. She needed to see Miguel grow up. Sophia quickly took the baby from Maria's arms, who sank to her knees, sobbing. Edward knelt beside her, wrapping her in a tight hug. "She didn't want to go," he whispered, feeling his own tears fall. "But she was suffering so much, little one. Now she's at rest." Maria cried for a long time, a deep sorrow that seemed to come from her soul. Edward held her the entire time, remembering how many losses the child had already faced in her short life. "She asked me something," Maria said finally, her voice choked. "Before we left yesterday, she held my hand and asked—" "What did she ask, Maria?" "She asked me never to forget that I have a father and a brother now," the girl whispered. "She said I shouldn't feel alone in the world anymore." Edward felt his heart clench. Even in her final moments, Helena had thought of Maria's well-being. "And she was right," he replied, pulling back slightly to look into the girl's eyes. "You're my daughter now, Maria, just as much as Miguel is my son. But what if you get tired of us? What if—" "Never," Edward interrupted firmly. "You are my family, forever." Sophia returned to the study with Miguel, who had calmed down. "I think he senses it too," she said softly, handing the baby to Maria. The girl took her brother carefully, her tears still falling. "Miss Helena said we'd need each other very much," she murmured. "That family is like that. We cry together, but we laugh together too." Edward watched his two children, feeling a mixture of grief and love he had never experienced before. "We'll take care of each other," he promised. "It's what Helena wanted." At that moment, Anthony appeared at the study door, his face grim. "Mr. Ashton, there's a problem." "What is it?" "The reporters," the driver answered, hesitant. "Someone leaked the information about Miguel. They're starting to gather at the estate gates." Edward felt a chill run down his spine. He knew this moment would come, but he hadn't expected it so soon, not on the day they had just lost Helena. "How did they find out?" Sophia asked, indignant. "Ricardo," Edward snarled, anger momentarily replacing grief. "Helena's brother must have sold the story to the press as a final act of revenge." Maria hugged Miguel tighter, her eyes wide with fear. "Are they going to try and take us away?" "Never," Edward replied, standing up. Years of business experience had taught him how to handle crises. "I'll call my lawyers right now. We'll handle this the right way." What about Miss Helena's funeral? Maria asked quietly. Edward paused, feeling the weight of that responsibility. They needed to say goodbye to Helena properly, give her the respect she deserved. But how, with the press turning everything into a circus? We'll find a way, he promised, kissing Maria's forehead. Helena deserves a peaceful farewell, and that's what we'll give her. Sophia began drawing the curtains in the study, while Anthony went out to reinforce security at the gates. Outside, the growing buzz of voices and the flash of cameras could be heard. Edward looked at his children, then at the portrait of his mother on the study wall. "Help me now, Mother," he whispered. "Help me protect our family." The next 48 hours became a controlled nightmare. Edward had Helena's body moved to a discreet funeral home, far from the eyes of the press, but reporters seemed to multiply by the hour outside the manor gates. Sensational headlines were already circulating throughout the city. Millionaire. Edward Ashton hides illegitimate son. Waitress dies, leaves baby for tycoon. Mystery at Ashton Manor. Who is the street kid? Maria watched it all through a gap in the curtains of her room, rocking Miguel, who seemed increasingly restless. Each day, "They're like vultures," she murmured to Edward, who had just entered the room. "Miss Helena always said some people feed on the sadness of others." Edward sat on the edge of the bed, exhausted after another meeting with his lawyers. "I won't let them get near you," he promised, but he knew they needed to act fast. Sophia entered the room carrying a tray with hot chocolate, something that had become a comfort ritual for Maria. "Mr. Davies is waiting in the study, Mr. Ashton," he said. "It's urgent," Edward sighed. Mr. Davies was his oldest, most trusted lawyer. If he said it was urgent, it must be. "Can you stay with the children, Sophia?" The housekeeper nodded, but Maria stood up abruptly. "I want to come too. If it's about us, I have a right to know." Edward studied the girl's determined face. Just a few weeks, she'd become such a part of his life that the idea of making decisions without her felt wrong. "All right," he agreed. "Sophia, can you stay with Miguel?" In the study, Mr. Davies awaited them with a grave expression. His eyes widened slightly upon seeing Maria enter hand in hand with Edward. "I have troubling news," he began, adjusting his glasses. "Ricardo, Miss Helena's brother, is threatening to go to the press with a different story. He claims you prevented him from having contact with his nephew, that you hid the child from him." "That liar!" Maria burst out, jumping out of her chair. "He wanted to sell Miguel. He made Miss Helena run away." Mr. Davies looked surprised at the girl, then at Edward. "Is this true?" Edward nodded, quickly explaining the story of Ricardo's threats, the plan to sell the baby, Helena's flight. "This changes everything," the lawyer murmured, making notes. "But we need proof, witnesses." "I'm a witness," Maria declared. "I saw him threatening Miss Helena at the hospital. He said he'd get revenge, that he'd tell the newspapers everything." Mr. Davies shook his head sadly. "Unfortunately, the testimony of a child." "Maria isn't just a child," Edward interrupted him, his voice sharp. "She saved my son, protected him when no one else could, and now she's my daughter too." The lawyer's eyes widened. "Your daughter?" "I'm going to adopt Maria officially," Edward declared, surprising even himself with the certainty in his voice. "I should have done it sooner." Maria froze beside him, her eyes filling with tears. You really want to?" Edward pulled her close. "I do, if you want to as well." The girl hugged him tightly, sobbing. Mr. Davies cleared his throat, visibly moved. "Well, that certainly changes the legal landscape," he said, composing himself. "But Helena's funeral, how will we handle the press?" Edward had already thought about this. "Helena deserves a dignified farewell. We'll have a small service, just for close family and friends, in the private chapel on the estate." "And after?" Maria asked quietly. "After," Edward took a deep breath. I'm going to give a single press conference. Tell our story, on our terms. Show that we're a real family, not some tabloid scandal." Mr. Davies began to protest, but Edward raised a hand. "I've hidden away too much in my life, Mr. Davies. Helena taught me that sometimes we need to trust. And now," he looked at Maria, "I have to teach my children to face the world with their heads held high." Maria squeezed his hand, and in that moment, Edward felt a certainty he'd never known before. No matter what Ricardo or the press did, they would face it together. "There's one more thing," he said to Mr. Davies. "I want you to prepare the paperwork. To create a foundation, we'll help at-risk youth, give them the same chance Maria gave Miguel. The Helena Foundation," Maria whispered, a small smile through her tears. Edward nodded, feeling his heart clench. Outside, the camera flashes continued, but inside the manor, protected by century-old walls, a family was growing stronger with each moment. The chapel at Ashton Manor was lit only by candles on the morning of Helena's funeral. Edward had managed, with the help of Anthony and some extra security guards, to keep the press away. Only a small group of people occupied the wooden pews, long-serving household staff, a few nurses who had cared for Helena, and the family she had left behind. Maria wore a simple black dress Sophia had bought in a hurry, her hair tied back in an impeccable braid. In her arms, Miguel slept peacefully, oblivious to the solemnity of the moment. Edward watched his children with a tightness in his chest, thinking how life could be simultaneously so cruel and so generous. The priest, an elderly man who had known the Ashton family for decades, conducted the service with touching simplicity. He spoke of love, of sacrifice, of how sometimes angels appear in our lives in the most unexpected moments. "Miss Helena was an angel," Maria whispered to Edward, her voice choked with emotion. "She saved Miguel and me." "She saved us all," Edward replied softly, holding his daughter's small hand. After the service, as the small group dispersed in respectful silence, Mr. Davies approached discreetly. "The adoption papers are ready," he informed him in a low voice. "And I found something interesting about Ricardo. You need to see this." Edward nodded, but his eyes were fixed on Maria, who had knelt before Helena's coffin. "Wait for me in the study," he asked the lawyer. "I need a moment with my family." Maria was speaking softly to Miguel, showing him the photo of Helena that would be buried with her, the same image of her holding her newborn son. "Look, Miguel," she said gently. "This is your mommy. She was beautiful, wasn't she? And she loved you so much, so much. I promise I'll tell you about her every day, so you never forget." Edward felt tears stream down his face. He knelt beside his children, gently touching Helena's serene face. "Thank you," he whispered, "for trusting me, for giving me this family. I promise I'll take care of them with my life." Maria rested her head on his shoulder. "Miss Helena said that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what truly matters." Edward hugged his children, feeling the weight and blessing of that responsibility. When they finally left the chapel, the afternoon sun painted golden, shadows through the stained glass windows like a final caress from Helena. In the study, Mr. Davies awaited them with a thick folder on the desk. Maria had insisted on joining the meeting, and Edward hadn't had the heart to refuse. "What did you find out about Ricardo?" Edward asked, sitting down with Miguel on his lap. The lawyer opened the folder, revealing a series of documents. "He has an interesting history, several accusations of extortion, 2 arrests. And I found this." It was an old newspaper report from almost 10 years ago. Ricardo appeared in a photo, handcuffed, being led away by police. The headline spoke of an illegal adoption ring. "So it wasn't the first time," Maria murmured, her eyes wide. "He'd done this before." "Exactly," Mr. Davies confirmed. And there's more. I've managed to contact some of his previous victims. They're willing to testify. Edward felt a wave of relief mixed with anger. Does this mean we can prosecute him? We can do more than that, the lawyer smiled slightly. We can ensure he never hurts another family again. Maria, who had been quiet, absorbing everything, suddenly sat up straighter in her chair. Miss Helena would be happy, she said with conviction. She always said the truth would come out one day. Edward looked at his daughter with admiration. Even so, young, she understood the weight of justice, the value of truth. Mr. Davies, he called, his voice firm, prepare everything. I want Ricardo to pay for every family he destroyed. And as for the adoption papers, I've already filed the petition, the lawyer completed. With your clean record and the special circumstances of the case, there shouldn't be any problems. Maria held her breath. Does that mean it's going to be official? Edward pulled her close, kissing her forehead. It's going to be official. And daughter, you and Miguel, my children before the law and in my heart. On Edward's lap, Miguel opened his eyes, those same deep blue eyes, and smiled for the first time since Helena's death. Maria noticed instantly. Look, Dad, she exclaimed. The word Dad, sounding so natural, it made Edward's heart skip a beat. Miguel's smiling. Miss Helena used to say that when a baby smiles, it's because angels are nearby. Edward looked out the study window where the sky was beginning to turn shades of pink and gold. Perhaps Helena really was there, smiling down on the family she had helped create. On the morning of the press conference, Ashton Manor was in an uproar. Sophia hurried back and forth, adjusting Edward's tie, checking if Maria's dress was properly pressed, ensuring Miguel looked impeccable in his navy blue outfit. We don't have to do this, Edward said for the 10th time, watching Maria nervously. Rehearse the words she planned to say in front of the mirror. We can wait a bit longer. The girl turned to him, her eyes showing a maturity that sometimes startled him. Miss Helena always said truth is like medicine. Sometimes it's bitter, but it heals you from the inside. Edward smiled, tucking a loose strand of hair behind his daughter's ear. In the weeks since Helena's funeral, Maria had become his strength, his moral compass. Every important decision, every difficult moment, she faced with a wisdom that seemed to come directly from Helena. Mr. Ashton, Anthony appeared at the door, his expression tense. The reporters are arriving. And there's one more thing. Ricardo is among them. Maria instinctively grabbed her father's hand, but her chin remained high. He can't hurt us anymore, right? No, Edward assured her, though he felt his own heart race. We have all the evidence against him now. This is our chance to tell the real story. Mr. Davies had organized everything meticulously. The press conference would be held in the Manor Garden, where Mr. Peterson had created a perfect backdrop with his most beautiful roses, the same ones Maria now helped care for every morning. The flowers will be on TV, the old gardener had said with pride. They'll show this house has real life in it now. As they went down to the garden, Edward carrying Miguel and Maria holding firmly onto his free hand, Sophia stopped them for a moment. Wait, she said, her eyes glistening. I have something for you. The housekeeper held out a small golden brooch to Maria. It was a delicate butterfly with tiny blue stones in its wings. It was my daughter's, Sophia explained, her voice choked. She passed away many years ago, but I think she would have liked you to wear it today. Maria hugged the housekeeper tightly. Thank you, Mrs. Sophia. You're like a grandmother to us now. Edward watched the scene, feeling his heart tighten. His house, once so cold and empty, now overflowed with love in every corner. The garden was crowded with reporters when they finally emerged. Camera flashes exploded from all sides, but Edward kept his gaze fixed ahead, shielding his children. In the front row, Ricardo watched them with a sarcastic smirk. Beside him, a tabloid reporter was already preparing nasty questions. Mr. Davies took his place at the microphone first, explaining the rules for the conference. Edward used these moments to sit with the children in the small area prepared for them, surrounded by Mr. Peterson's roses. "Ready?" he whispered. Maria adjusted the butterfly brooch on her dress and nodded. Miguel, as if sensing the importance of the moment, remained extraordinarily quiet on his father's lap. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Davies began, "we are here on today to clarify some facts regarding the Ashton family. Mr. Ashton would like to make an initial statement." Edward stood up, still holding Miguel. Maria stood beside him, her small hand naturally finding his. "A few weeks ago," he began, his voice firm, "I was a man who believed he couldn't have a family, who had built walls so high around himself that no one could get through." He paused, looking at his children. "Then, on a stormy night, God sent me 2 angels, a brave little girl who taught me the true meaning of love and loyalty, and a baby who proved to me that miracles happen." In the front row, Ricardo shifted uncomfortably. Edward continued, "Helena Martins was an extraordinary woman who made the ultimate sacrifice to protect her son. She trusted in the love of a street child and in the goodness she saw in me, even when I didn't see it in myself." Maria squeezed his hand, and Edward felt all her strength flow through that small gesture. "Today," he went on, "I'm not here to defend myself against accusations or explain past choices. I'm here to introduce my family to the world, Maria and Miguel Ashton, my beloved children who taught me that family isn't just blood. It's love, it's choice, it's a miracle." The camera flashes continued, but now there was a different silence in the garden. Even the most cynical reporters seemed touched by the scene before them. A powerful businessman transformed by the love of 2 children, an unlikely family united by grief and hope. The silence in the garden was broken by Ricardo's harsh voice, as he abruptly stood up from his chair. "What a nice story, Ashton," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "But why don't you tell the truth? How you hid my nephew, how you prevented Helena from contacting me?" Maria took a step forward, trembling but determined. "You're lying!" Her childlike voice echoed through the garden. "You were the one who made Miss Helena run away. You were the one who wanted to sell Miguel." A murmur went through the crowd of reporters. The cameras now turned to Ricardo, who visibly paled. "It's the word of a street kid against mine," he tried to argue, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Mr. Davies signaled, and 2 plainclothes police officers who had been discreetly positioned in the garden approached. "Actually," the lawyer said, his voice calm but firm, "we have much more than words. We have documents, witnesses, and proof of an extensive history of extortion and child trafficking." Ricardo tried to back away, but the officers were already beside him. "This is absurd, a setup." "The lady from the hospital," Maria continued, her voice gaining strength, "the nurse who heard you threatening your own sister, she didn't stay silent. She told everything." Edward placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder, proud of her courage. Miguel, still in his arms, began to cry, as if sensing the tension in the air. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Davies addressed the reporters, "you came here expecting a scandal, but you found a love story. A story about a mother who gave her life to protect her son, about a girl who risked everything to save a baby, about a man who learned that family is so much more than blood." The officers were already escorting Ricardo out of the garden as he shouted incoherent threats, but few were paying attention to him now. All eyes were fixed on the Ashton family. Maria stepped up to the microphone, surprising everyone. Her small, clear voice cut through the morning air. "Miss Helena taught me that we don't choose the family we're born into, but we can choose the family we want to have. She chose to give her life for Miguel. I chose to protect him. And Mr. Ashton, she smiled at her father, he chose to love us, even without having to. Edward felt tears stream down his face, unconcerned about the cameras. Sophia, watching from a corner of the garden, was also crying openly. And one more thing, Maria continued, taking something from her dress pocket. It was the photo of Helena with newborn Miguel, a copy Edward had made before burying the original with her. I want everyone to meet my mother, Helena, not the woman from the tabloid gossip, but the real Helena, the bravest woman who ever lived. The photographers respectfully moved closer to capture the image. In the photo, Helena's tired but radiant smile told more than 1,000 words. The Helena Foundation, Edward spoke again, which we will launch next month, will be dedicated to helping at-risk youth and single mothers in need. Because we believe, as Helena believed, that every child deserves a chance, that every love story deserves to be protected. An older female journalist raised her hand, her eyes glistening. Mr. Ashton, you are one of the most successful businessmen in the country. How has this experience changed your view of success? Edward looked at Miguel in his arms, at Maria by his side, at the photo of Helena now circulating among the reporters. He remembered the man he was just weeks ago, rich, powerful, and utterly alone. Success? He smiled, kissing Miguel's forehead. Success is this, having your children safe in your arms, seeing love in their eyes, being able to honor the memory of someone who gave everything to protect that love. Maria hugged his waist, and Edward felt, once again, that absolute certainty that only true love brings. High above, a cluster of blue butterflies danced among Mr. Peterson's roses, as if Helena herself was sending her own sign of approval. A month after the press conference, Ashton Manor was unrecognizable. What was once a place of silence and solitude now overflowed with life. The hallways echoed with Maria's laughter, Miguel's occasional cries, and the lively conversations of the staff, who for the first time in years felt like part of a real family. On that special morning, Edward watched from his study as Maria helped Mr. Peterson gather roses for the launch of the Helena Foundation. The girl, wearing a light blue dress and Sophia's ever-present butterfly brooch, patiently explained to the gardener how each flower would be used in the decoration. The white ones will go near Miss Helena's picture, she said, carefully selecting the most perfect blooms. She loved white roses, you know. Edward smiled, remembering how his life had changed. Ricardo was in jail, awaiting trial for his extortion attempts and involvement in child trafficking. The evidence was irrefutable, and more victims continued to come forward to testify. A familiar whimper pulled him from his thoughts. Miguel had woken from his morning nap. Edward lifted him from the crib, which now occupied a cozy corner of the study. He couldn't bear to be far from his children, even during work meetings. "Good morning, champ," he whispered, kissing his son's forehead. Miguel's blue eyes, so like his own, sparkled in recognition. Sophia entered the study carrying a bottle. "Your new suit is pressed for this afternoon, sir," she informed him. But her eyes were fixed on Miguel, a fond smile on her face. "And Maria has already picked all the flowers with Mr. Peterson." "Thank you, Sophia," Edward replied, noticing how the housekeeper seemed younger, happier, "for everything." Sophia understood his unspoken meaning. She had been much more than an employee these past months. She had been a grandmother to the children, a pillar of strength for everyone. "Miss Helena would be proud," she said softly, "to see how her family has grown." Just then, Maria ran into the study, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Dad! Dad! Look what I found in the garden!" In her small hands, she held something that made Edward's heart stop for a moment, a white feather perfectly preserved. Miss Helena used to say that when you find a white feather, it's a sign your guardian angel is near, Maria explained, her eyes shining. Can we put it with her picture at the launch? Edward nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Maria ran to the crib where Miguel was now playing with his bottle, showing the feather to her brother. Look, Miguel, Mommy sent us a present. Edward watched his children, feeling that immense love that sometimes seemed too big for his chest. On the study wall, the photo of his own mother seemed to smile in approval. Mr. Ashton, Anthony appeared. At the door, the first guests for the launch have started to arrive. The Helena Foundation occupied an entire building downtown. It was an ambitious project. Besides offering shelter for homeless youth, it would provide legal and medical support for single mothers in need, vocational courses, and a special program for adoption support. Shall we get ready? He asked Maria, who immediately picked up Miguel with the special care she always showed her brother. I already picked out Miguel's tie, she informed him proudly. Blue, just like his eyes. Miss Helena would have liked that. As they went upstairs to prepare, Edward thought about how his life had transformed in just a few months. The pain of losing Helena was still there, likely always would be. But alongside it was something else. Gratitude. Gratitude for the love she had left as her legacy, for the miracle his children were, for the family that had been born from the ashes of sorrow. Sophia waited for them at the top of the stairs with their outfits laid out. Maria's new dress, Miguel's little suit, the tie that matched the baby's eyes, every detail chosen with love. Dad? Maria called as Sophia helped her get ready. Do you think some people are born to be alone? Edward knelt in front of his daughter, adjusting the butterfly brooch on her dress. No, sweetheart. I think sometimes we just need to open our hearts to find the family that was already destined for us. Maria smiled, that smile that lit up all the dark corners that once existed in Ashton Manor. Like us, right? We found each other because it was meant to be. Edward hugged his children, smelling the scent of roses from the garden drifting through the window. In a few hours, the Helena Foundation would open its doors, ready to help other families find each other, other love stories to begin. The main hall of the Helena Foundation was filled with white roses. In the center, a life-sized photograph showed Helena smiling, her eyes shining with the kindness that had touched so many lives. Beside the photo, in a small glass dome, the white feather Maria had found rested on a cushion of blue velvet. Edward stood on the makeshift stage, Miguel in his arms and Maria by his side, observing the crowd gathered for the launch. There were officials, journalists, business leaders, but what stood out most were the dozens of single mothers and vulnerable children who had been specially invited, the first beneficiaries of the foundation. Dad, Maria whispered, squeezing his hand. Look who came. In the front row, Edward recognized familiar faces. The nurse who had cared for Helena in her final days, holding a bouquet of flowers. The doctor who had treated Miguel on that first stormy night. Several people from the shelter where Helena had met Maria. Each of them a crucial piece of the story that had brought them here. Sophia and Anthony occupied seats of honor as members of the foundation's board of directors. Mr. Peterson, despite insisting on standing at the back, was easily identifiable by his proud smile and the handkerchief he occasionally dabbed at his eyes. When Edward approached the microphone, a respectful silence fell over the hall. Miguel, as if sensing the importance of the moment, remained quiet in his arms, his curious blue eyes fixed on the ceiling lights. 3 months ago, Edward began, his voice thick with emotion, I was a man who believed he had everything that mattered in life. I had success, money, power, but I was completely mistaken. He paused, looking at his children. It took a storm, a brave little girl and a newborn baby to show me what truly matters. It took the love of an extraordinary woman who gave her life to protect her son, to teach me the true meaning of family. Maria held his hand tighter, and Edward saw silent, tears running down the faces of many in attendance. The Helena Foundation is born today, not just as an institution of support, he continued, but as a testament to love. A mother's love, a sister's love, a family's love. Here, we want to create a space where other Helenas can find help, where other Marias can find hope, where other families can form and grow stronger. Edward then did something that surprised everyone. He passed the microphone to Maria. The girl, who just months ago had been living on the streets, now carried herself with a dignity that moved everyone. Miss Helena taught me that family isn't just about who shares your blood, she said, her voice clear and steady. Family is who you choose to love, who you choose to protect. She chose to give her life for Miguel. I chose to take care of him. And our dad. She smiled at Edward. He chose to love us, even when everyone said it was crazy. At that moment, Miguel let out a joyful laugh, as if wanting to join in. The sound of his laughter echoed through the hall, prompting emotional smiles. This is the real miracle, Edward resumed, kissing his son's forehead. It's not about blood. It's not about money. It's not about power. It's about love. The love that transforms, that heals, that builds bridges where there were once walls. Maria then took something from her little pocket, the old photo of Helena with newborn Miguel. I want this to be the first picture on our story wall, she announced, so everyone who comes here knows that miracles happen, that family is where love is. As Maria walked towards the wall, specially prepared to display stories of hope, Edward noticed something extraordinary. A blue butterfly, just like the one on Sophia's brooch, had flown in through the window and now rested gently on Helena's photograph. Look, Dad, Maria whispered, amazed. Miss Helena came to the launch. Edward hugged his children, feeling that immense love that had transformed his life. In the hall, people began to stand, giving a standing ovation. Many wept openly, touched by the story of love and redemption they had witnessed. Sophia approached with an envelope in her hands. The official documents arrived, she announced, smiling through tears. The adoption is approved. It's official. Now, Maria and Miguel Ashton. Maria leapt into her father's arms, while Miguel clapped his hands, caught up in the general joy. Edward held his children, feeling his heart might burst with happiness. Are we a real family now? Maria asked, her eyes shining. We always were, daughter, Edward replied, kissing her forehead. Since that stormy night. Helena knew. She always knew. The blue butterfly remained perched on Helena's photo, its wings shimmering under the hall lights. Outside, the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold. At the Helena Foundation, a new story was beginning, a story of love, hope, and new beginnings. And somewhere, Edward was certain, Helena smiled, knowing her sacrifice had not been in vain. Her family was united, strong, complete. Her love had created a miracle that would continue transforming lives for generations to come.